All right, perfect. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Ionic for Enterprise. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Matt Netkow. I'm head of developer relations at Ionic, and I have a very special guest today, Max Lynch, co-founder and CEO of Ionic. Hey, Max, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for everyone for coming on today. Just a couple of things, before we start, some housekeeping items. We always record our webinar, so if you have to drop off or you join late, don't worry. We always record the webinar and send out these slides, demo apps, links to everything in an email later on today. So just stay on the lookout for that. And the key thing, we love our Q&A here, so stay tuned to the end. Max and I will be answering any and all questions about Ionic and the Ionic app platform. So submit your questions over in the Zoom chat and questions channel little box there, and we will get to them. Feel free to drop them in as you think of them throughout the whole presentation. So, all right, we've got a lot to get covered and talk about today. So let's get to it. So the first thing, kind of quick agenda, we're going to talk to you a little bit about who we are at Ionic, what we do and what we're all about, cover our entire enterprise platform and product suite. And then I have I'm excited to talk through and show off a live app demo covering the entire platform product, suite and app features. And then Max is going to talk about our customers and some of the great companies that are building with Ionic today. And of course, we'll have that live Q&A. So again, leave your questions off on the right panel. So let's do it. So first thing, just a quick intro. If you're new, whether you're new to Ionic or need a refresher, we've got some great stuff to cover here and kind of talk about at a high level. So first of all, what do we do at Ionic? Who are we all about? We are the leading cross-platform app building solution for developers, and specifically all about web development and empowering web developers to build really great apps that run on desktop, mobile, as progressive web apps, all of those different platforms, all from one code base using web technologies. So that's your JavaScript, HTML, CSS, all those familiar technologies that you're used to as in working in web development. And so because of that, we like to say we take a web first approach. We're all about building for the web, progressive web apps, and then deploying them to mobile and desktop as needed. And you'll see this is something that has, we've been around for a number of years now, and it's really resonated because we have over 5 million developers using our platform worldwide, based on building open source and public apps and all kinds of everything from hobbyists to large corporate enterprises. And as a result, I think the most exciting stat that we have been touting here is we're now powering over 15% of all apps in both the Google Play and the Apple App Store. So definitely something that we're here to show you why that is and what's so powerful about Ionic. So let's talk next about that. Why specifically Ionic? What kind of problems do we help you solve in your app development journey and process? Well, when we let's take a look at what traditional app development projects are all about, what the team makeup is, the technologies, and how you deploy them. So we see here with our little image, you typically have 3 to 4 different teams depending on your needs and the platforms you're trying to deploy to. Of course, on the mobile side, you'll have a dedicated native iOS and Android team. So developers that know iOS and Android specific programming languages, SDKs, technologies, what have you. And they're going to be responsible for building and deploying their iOS and Android app for the project. Then every team today has a web team. Even if you're just quote unquote managing a website for your company, you have a team of web developers that you're building with the building blocks of the web, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and they're going to deploy the web or mobile version of this project. And last but not least, you might have a desktop team if you have any internal line of business needs, data access, reporting capabilities. That wouldn't be something that the public sees. You might have a desktop team that's building those types of internal only facing tools using Java, .NET, C++. The gamut there is pretty wide, and building dedicated desktop apps. You might also have a consumer facing desktop app that your customers and users install as well. So really there's a lot of, the gist of this is that there's a lot of different teams involved on any given development project. So that's been the way things have been for many years now. But unfortunately, as we've seen, there's just too many problems with this to be sustainable, regardless of your company and industry and company size, all of those things. So specifically, what's wrong with this app development approach, right? Well, as we saw before, there's simply just too many teams. You have a lot of coordination there. A lot of, when you think about shipping new features and coordinating those things, it's often that different platforms can get ahead or behind each other, leading to frustrated users. And nowadays, your app users want you want them to reach them wherever they are across all different types of devices and platforms. So that's especially important. And this, again, additionally, with different teams, again, we see with those different tools and technologies, you end up with all these different code bases to maintain. And that can be a wild west of bugs and maintenance nightmares and things like that. Additionally, you saw that we have to hire for specialized skill sets, iOS and Android mobile developers, your web team. It's a lot to manage. It inflates your budget, of course, all different types of issues with that, as well as technical complexity. So trying to manage and maintain those features across platforms, understanding the gaps in each platform, and still delivering great experiences, it could be really challenging. So as to kind of summarize here, too many teams lead to higher costs, project delays as you have multiple code bases to juggle, there's a talent scarcity, right? Hiring for mobile is especially difficult. And there's a lot of risk involved in projects because of those project delays, costs can be overrun and really cripple your company, honestly. So, and that's what Ionic solves for, right? So the whole idea behind Ionic, I love this graphic here, is using web technology to build and deploy for all these platforms, right? With just one team, you can reach iOS, Android, desktop, and the mobile and desktop web as a progressive web app. So additionally, some of the other advantage of the Ionic app approach specifically is, as I mentioned, your company likely has a web development team in some fashion that you're utilizing today. And what's great about this is you can use that talent to build and deploy for mobile especially. And when we look at this, there's actually 10x more web devs available in the world than native mobile developers. So when you look at the abundance of talent there, it's so much easier to find great talent, hire them and retain them, and help them build great careers and get the most out of their web development skills. So really, it's a win-win across the board. And you're building apps you have apps that are built to last, right? The web browser technology and web browsers have been around for decades now. I think we're going on 3-4 decades, and with no sign of them stopping, right? I think most of us do work in any kind of apps for consumer or business in a web browser. We touch them every single day. We use them and love them. And so investing in that is just simply a no-brainer. And as a result of that, leveraging that web development talent and using web browser technology, we see with companies we work with significant cost savings because, again, you're building with one code base and reaching many platforms. So you have all those different costs and other things that are simply knocked out when you build with Ionic. So next, Max is going to talk us about how we can build enterprise-grade apps with Ionic. Go ahead.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, and if you're wondering what my Zoom background is, I neglected to mention that this is actually a picture from our office here in Madison, which we've not been in for a long time, which is sad, but I wanted to bring that energy this morning. So, so we are focused here at Ionic really on enabling enterprise teams to build award-winning app experiences. And one of the things that we try to do is balance all of the different constraints that you have. Like, we feel like we have the best combination that balances hiring constraints, getting speed to market, cost, ability to deploy on all the platforms you care about. So we try to balance all those things, and we think we've got a really good combo for enterprise teams. So part of this platform that we built all starts with the build side. And this is where a lot of our open source technologies come together to enable your team to build these award-winning app experiences. So being able to build one app that runs on iOS, Android, on the web as a progressive web app, using the exact same code, using standard web technology that's super easy to hire for, that works with all the existing, web development investments you've made over the last decade plus. That's a huge advantage. We also give you over 100 UI building blocks. So these are the components in Ionic Framework and beyond that let you really quickly stitch together an app. And in many cases, go quite a bit further than what you get from the typical native stack. So Apple and Google actually give you fewer components than Ionic Framework does out of the gate. But we give you those standard components too, like tabs, navigation, things like that. Underneath that, we have a cross-platform native runtime that gives you full native access to the devices underneath. So you can literally do everything that a typical native developer, native app can do because it is a native app. You have full access to Swift and Java if you need to drop down. The difference is you're building 95, 98% of your app in that cross-platform web layer, and you have that last escape hatch, that 3 to 5%, where you can drop down and do anything. So that is really the difference between going full native and going something like Ionic that we call web native, is you get that huge time cost benefit, but you still can access all that functionality if you need it. All right, so then we move into the other part of the build side, which is something that we offer for enterprises. And that's kind of a supported platform around all the functionality that your app might need. So we all know that good, interesting apps integrate with third-party services, native device features, everything that you can imagine an app needs to do. You're going to need to do that in an Ionic app. And obviously, you can go out and find third-party community-built plugins, and those are great. But one of the things that's really interesting about the Ionic platform for enterprises is that we offer something that is really, really rare in the open source world, which is a supported layer on top of that. So if you use our supported layer, we will help you with plugins that you need for your app to be useful. If there's security issues, if there's bugs, things like that. And if you think about that, like that's a pretty rare, valuable feature that as a developer, I don't think I've ever seen in any open source project that I've really used. And certainly not in the mobile world. You can't call up Google, you can't call up Facebook, et cetera. So that's something really, really interesting. And I think our customers really end up loving this because, we've had people tell us like, oh man, I didn't realize I could just call you up and I wouldn't have, suffered through this random plugin I found that's maintained by one person in their spare time. And that's really interesting. So then we move into the security layer around the Ionic platform. So we offer advanced native security and storage features, particularly around user authentication, biometric authentication, storing secrets, storing encrypted data at rest on the device. It's amazing the capabilities that modern mobile devices have in terms of hardware dedicated to secure storage and encryption, APIs for doing the same. But those APIs are probably the most difficult APIs to use of any feature on the phones. And so we've built out a collection of security-focused tools and native solutions around this secure hardware, around these secure APIs. So the first one is Identity Vault. And Identity Vault is a biometric authentication management solution. If we go to the next slide here. Mm-hmm. And this is how you can enable users to log in with biometrics that ends up unlocking a sensitive JWT token or even an encryption key, something that is really, historically you've been told, don't put like an encryption key on the client, right? Well, mobile devices are different. They have dedicated hardware to be able to store those things securely, but integrating with that, like I said, is really difficult. So Identity Vault basically is a drop-in solution that manages biometric authentication on iOS and Android, handles things like when your fingerprint or face enrollment is removed, basically making sure we never expose that stored value to anyone, even on a rooted device and things like that. So it ends up being like thousands and thousands of lines of code that we write and we maintain, and we work with a lot of customers to make sure it's secure and high performance and all that. And you just drop it into your app and you get it right out of the box. So this is an amazing feature, really, really useful. And Identity Vault works with our other product, Auth Connect. And Auth Connect is a single sign-on solution. So where Auth Connect would handle the integration with your identity providers, so Auth0, Ping Identity, Azure B2C, Identity Vault would then manage the storage of, say, the JWT token or other sensitive user info and enable biometric authentication going the other direction. So Auth Connect is definitely our most popular product. If you've ever done native authentication, I mean, as a developer, when I think about my least favorite things to do, it's always authentication, right? That's the stuff that feels like it should just work. It should be easy. I shouldn't have spent any time on it, so I can focus on what's unique about my app. Of course, it always ends up being the opposite, right? Where you end up spending 90% of your time getting the auth setup working and all that, frustration. And so Auth Connect fixes that. You install Auth Connect, paste in your configuration values. It handles all the native authentication flows. If you're using Identity Vault, you can store the JWT token securely. It's so much easier than the suffering of doing that auth stuff yourself.
Well, not to mention, Max, the risk of trying to implement it yourself. We've seen thousands of horror stories from other companies all the time in the news that leaked data or missed an important detail. And it only takes one detail and your customer data is compromised. So
exactly. It's and take it from us. Like, we have a dedicated team working on like Identity Vault and Auth Connect and integrating with those security APIs. It is very difficult. I would say probably of all the things I've seen in terms of APIs on mobile, they are some of the most difficult ones to integrate with, for sure. Very little documentation. It's a different type of API than a typical Swift API. So pretty challenging. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then we move into the deliver side of the offering. And this is something that we're starting to see a lot more people use and integrate as they start to build out a CI/CD or DevOps capability in their development process. So teams are starting to move more quickly. They're starting to release more frequently. And the only way that's possible is if you have automated CI/CD kind of on the back end, enabling continuous integration, doing frequent builds, publishing to testers, to app stores. And that's what our Appflow layer does as part of this platform. So this offers in the cloud native app building compilation. So for example, if you're on Windows, you can set up your app in the system and it will do cloud builds for you for iOS. It'll also do Android builds. It will publish apps directly to the app stores. So I can tell you firsthand, my least favorite thing to do as a mobile developer is deal with publishing to the app stores. It's a nightmare. I think everyone would agree. It's very tedious. You can fully automate that with this solution. So setting up, on a commit, you're ready to push it to the app store. It's really, really compelling. And then there's a superpower that comes along with using this, and that's over-the-air live updates. So being able to actually update the look and feel, the functionality of your app in real time in a way that is App Store compliant, terms of service compliant. And this ends up being one of those superpowers of both building with the web, because you can actually do web updates in a terms of service compatible way, whereas you can't update native code that way. But if you're updating web code that way, it turns out you can actually do so many things, and you gain a level of agility and control that is really kind of a superpower in mobile, like being able to, let's say, push a critical bug fix after you just released your app to the App Store. Historically, you'd have to wait several days for that to be approved, but with Appflow, you can update it right away. So that ends up being a massive, massive draw for this offering. And then finally, we have single sign-on support for teams and integration with your Git provider, whether that's GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket integration, or working on Azure DevOps support. So you manage your code yourself, and then you'll trigger builds on commits and things like that. It ends up being really easy to integrate. And then to tie this all together, again, something really, really unique that we offer that's pretty much unheard of in the front end mobile space is that we support all of this. And not only do we support it, but we also have experts in mobile who are here to help your team be successful. So often what we're seeing with companies is they're bringing development in-house. They're starting to build up a capability to build their own software, their own apps, and they benefit from having a team like Ionic of mobile experts that can help them with the stuff that they don't need to, that's not really core to their app. So whether that's iOS updates, Android updates, new APIs, security functionality, mobile best practices, architecture reviews, we're here to be that foundation for you so you can focus on what's unique about your app and hire developers who are more suited to working on what's unique about your app, and then rely on Ionic for all the other stuff. And that ends up being a really high leverage use of this offering. So on top of that, we have onboarding sessions, architecture reviews. We'll talk through best practices. We'll give you security updates when things, even if it's not necessarily with our technology, we're tracking all that stuff. We'll let you know if we think there's a critical update. And, again, like think about where you would get something like this in mobile or front end. It's very, very unique, and ends up being something that people really, really love. Again, we've had situations where customers will have an issue with, say, their app got pulled from the App Store, something completely unrelated to Ionic was, something else. And what ended up being a really stressful, difficult time for them on a weekend, no less, Ionic and their experience with us ended up being kind of the bright spot because they were able to get in touch with us on a weekend. We were able to kind of give them our thoughts on, where we thought the issue was, what they could do. Even though it had nothing to do with our stuff, it ended up being really, really useful. And so think about that next time you're planning a big mission critical app is, the benefit of having someone like Ionic basically on call, even on the weekends, even though we don't like to make a habit of that, it is something that we offer that ends up being really, really valuable.
Awesome. Thank you, Max. That was an excellent overview of our platform. So, I think it's time to actually see it in action. So here, I'm going to jump into a live demo. Really excited to show this off. So as before I do this though, I've got a QR code here. So if you're sitting at your desk, like watching the presentation, and you want to try the actual app on your phone as a PWA, open the camera app on your Android or iOS device and scan that QR code right now. If you don't get to it, I'm going to show it at the end with our Q&A too. So we can always access that later. But what we're going to talk about is what we call Ionifits, which is a Zenefits type human resources clone with expense management, employee directory, and more. So this is a progressive web app that I've built using all of the Ionic app platform. And it's built and deployed for the web, iOS, and Android. So we're going to see that in action across all three. And of course, the code is open source on GitHub. So we'll show that link and you'll get this after the presentation to check it out. So let's switch over to the app itself and code. Okay. So on the right here, I have my actual iPhone device plugged into my computer here. And we're gonna show off the actual app running on the device. And on the left, I have Visual Studio Code open with the code itself, and we're gonna kind of talk through different features of the platform. First off, this is an Ionic Angular app. This is built with mostly Angular technologies here, and using all of our Ionic app technologies. We also work with React and Vue, and really any modern web app framework or technology. So this is a particular Angular app, but keep in mind that all of this works with across the board with whatever your favorite JavaScript or web framework of choice. So first, let's take a look at our login page here. So the idea of the app, if we're thinking about this again, is we want to provide an internal app for our employees to be able to contact each other, perform expense management, so upload receipts for different expenses as they buy them. But we need to secure this, right? So we can't just let you right into the app. That wouldn't be good. We need to have some security here. So this is my nicely designed login page. And you'll notice this is using Ionic Framework UI components. Max mentioned that we have over 100 of them, all open source and built specifically for mobile. And they work across mobile, desktop, and being built for the web. But what this includes is a bunch of animations and gestures, which I'll show off in a moment here. And you'll notice at the end of the day, what all of this is anything prefaced with the word Ion is one of the components. And you'll notice especially that there's really not too much here. It's just HTML code at the end of the day. Nothing proprietary. It's just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So your developers can jump in right away and be productive. I like to say you don't really learn Ionic or the framework. You just jump in as a web developer and reference our documentation and code samples and get going. I love, Max, you had said it's really about building up different UIs and using our pieces of the components to build something that's unique for you. So you'll notice we have a little card here. I think it's a little cut off just from my screen viewer here, but this extends the whole way, welcoming you to the app. The image and background is just CSS and an image tag here linking to an image. So really simple stuff, nothing out of the ordinary, with a button that allows us to log in. So we're going to do that. I'm going to tap this now. And what this is doing is actually using the Auth Connect product and solution that Max mentioned. So this is our single sign-on that works with Auth0. In this case, it's using Auth0, Azure, AWS, Ping Federate, lots of different providers. And I'm going to log in here. Again, this is a real app that I've set up, and I'm going to use a demo sample account here. And you can use this on your device too, user@test.com. And so I'm going to log in just a second. I'm going to explain some of how this works though. So when we integrate Auth Connect into our app, as Max said, all of those security concerns, the challenges of getting mobile security right, are taken care of for us with this product. We just drop it into the app. And how we're doing this is I'm actually using Angular's built-in environment files to configure Auth Connect based on the environment I'm running. So whether I'm running locally in like a development environment to staging, QA, or production, you're going to have different settings and configurations from your single sign-on provider. And that's what I have here. But a couple things to call out. It's just a very simple object that I'm saying, you know, here we are with Auth0. We're using Capacitor, which I'm going to mention more in a second, to actually build and deploy for native. And then the rest of these details are just details that come from your provider. Again, Auth0 in my case, your client ID, some of the URLs for redirection, and login and log out functionality. So I'm going to do that. Basically, what happens is you end up connecting this to your app. And then this screen is actually controlled by your provider. Here I've uploaded a logo and the name. Every provider has different configuration and security requirements like username and password, forgot password there, etc. So the sky's the limit and mostly controlled by those domains. So I'm going to log in here. And you'll see in just a couple clicks, really smooth and very seamless to get into the app. And I'm on my employee directory screen, which we're going to talk about in just a second. I think really the only last thing to mention is how I'm integrating Auth Connect using those environment details is just by extending and creating an authentication service class, which is a common development paradigm, right? Wrapping all of our login, log out functionality behind one particular JavaScript class. And really what that's doing is it's just injecting that environment config and passing it over into Auth Connect. And then I have access to different things like a login function attached to that login button, logout functionality, pretty much all taken care of for me without having to write very much code at all. The only other thing that happened when I tapped that login from Auth Connect is a login success event fired. And all I'm doing here is navigating to that employee directory page. That's about it, and dismissing any pop-ups or other error messages or success messages. That was about it, honestly. And then I have full authentication and SSO into the app. Next, let's look at this employee directory screen. So this is, again, a highlight of Ionic Framework and our UI components. So one thing to call out is you'll notice that I've got thousands and thousands of data records here loading. And you'll see that smooth performance, 60 frames per second, just from using Ionic's components. You could rebuild some of these details yourself for mobile, but the amount of engineering time that you would spend is just simply a waste when really you have so much that you have to build for your business, those unique features and functionality that your users want. Some of the other details I'd love to call out here are the animations and gestures that Ionic Framework gives you out of the box. So look, if we look on the right here at the people designation title at the top, as I'm scrolling, that nicely changes in a little bit there with a nice smooth animation. I didn't code that. That's all of our team, and it looks great and excellent. And as I navigate to subpages, look at a particular employee, look at the top as I'm tapping between different screens with the back item there, how that's, that scrolls the people title designation in and out smoothly. Those are the type of animations and gestures you could try to recreate for iOS and Android, but that is a ton of, honestly wasted effort when you could just use our components out of the box. So really, really awesome capabilities there. I also, in the upper right-hand corner, every page of the app tells you what piece of the platform is that we're using. So if I tap on that eye icon, we get the nice, Max, remind me, what is this card called in iOS parlance? This, the modal, I believe it is.
We call it a bottom drawer or a bottom sheet.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. So all of the implementation details slide nicely up, and I can quickly dismiss that or bring it back up. And really, if we take a look at what components I'm using, it's just, this whole screen is just a list with different items. Each row is an Ion item, and with an avatar, some labeling of the title, the person's name, and then we can link to a subpage of the employee detail. That's about it. That's all there is to it, just leveraging the Ionic Framework components. So next, we get into a little bit of some expense management. So this is all, using just web technology so far, but what about actually integrating with native functionality on the device? So in this case, let's say I'm working from home as I am right now, and I bought a nice robe or some kind of clothing that I want to use an expense and get Ionic to pay me back for that. So we're going to use more Ionic components and submit that expense.
I'm not sure that's a valid expense.
I'm going to try to get through it anyway. I'm going to try to push it through. But I know for sure that Max won't approve the expense unless I upload a receipt, because otherwise, as I'll do here, I went to my favorite merchant, Duluth, very popular in the Midwest. Maybe I spent, $100 on that, on those slippers. I'm going to tag it as a office expense. But again, I definitely can't sneak past Max or anyone without, using the camera to capture that expense receipt. So I'm doing this live right now. Here's my hand. You can see, here's an actual receipt, and we can quickly snap a photo and see that live in the app. My finger's still attached there. So how does that work? Let's take a step back and see what actually is happening here. So this is using specifically the camera functionality, is using Capacitor, which, as Max mentioned, is our native runtime that allows you to take your web-based app and deploy it to all these different platforms. So that's how it's actually running on the device right now. But additionally, we have some other features. So we have these official and community-based plugins, as well as the solutions like Auth Connect and Identity Vault that are, more paid solutions. We have these great core plugins that allow you to access native functionality like the camera, as we've seen, Bluetooth, geolocation, all out of the box. And, I'm a web developer myself. I don't know native code, so that can be a little scary, right? Well, what's great about Capacitor and how these APIs work is you expose, we'll take a look at this here. We expose, JavaScript-based APIs to your web developers, and all of that native functionality is sort of hidden down in native land. As Max said, you can still get in there if you have, a still mobile iOS and Android developers, but you don't necessarily need to. And this is the camera here is one of our core plugins. So what I'm doing when I tap on this photo button down here is I'm calling, I want to capture an expense receipt. I'm calling the get photo function, which opens the device, the camera on my device, which is this right here, right? And then I get that photo, which is probably going to get rejected because that's a really bad receipt. But I get that photo data as an image back with just a few, lightweight configurations, and I can display it on the screen, upload it to, a cloud provider, a database, what have you, and I'm rocking and rolling there. So all of that functionality in just one line of code. And you'll notice especially here that there's no mention of iOS or Android branching logic or even web-based. This code runs on all three of those platforms without any modification, which is part of my favorite, definitely my favorite part. You still have access and the option to do that. In fact, I'm doing this for setting one of the paths for the image to display this here. Using some helper functions. So you do still have that capability because sometimes, yes, you do want to run different logic based on the platform. We can check using the isNative, an example, helper method from Capacitor to say like, if we're running on mobile, do this. If we're running on very specific devices, do that. The sky's still the limit there. So then when I add that, comes back to my expenses, we see that it's a completed expense. I snuck that in past Max without him realizing. Too late, Max. Sorry about that. Awesome. So we've got, we have these, my employee management and expense management, but we want to secure that. We've secured that behind a login with Auth0, right? But mobile presents additional challenges, being that these are, physical devices that our employees carry. We think about the bring your own device movement nowadays. Everyone's bringing these into work, which, honestly can represent a security risk if not handled properly. So this is where our Identity Vault product comes into play. As Max mentioned, what we're doing is you have the ability to store and connect to those tokens when you sign in and store those on device in hardware securely. And that's done. That's not something visual I can show you. That's just done within the device itself. So what happens is when I signed in as we go on the settings screen as John Smith with our test account, that was encrypted in my iPhone's device. I believe it's literally on the chip, the CPU chip, and basically is about as secure as you can get. And this is the official way that Apple and Google recommend, and Identity Vault automatically does that for us. In fact, I think it was all I needed to do there. Yeah, that's right, is I'm providing Auth Connect with my token storage provider, which is this identity service class. So just like I have an expense class, I made an identity one that wraps Identity Vault's functionality. And this is even shorter. This is really just some configuration for to get some basic features. So the first one is I'm going to actually close this out and come back. And so we have Ionifits here. The first one is, again, I'm signed in. What if, we want to lock the app so that we can't just view my expenses at any time? We want to protect that. So even though I'm signed in, what's great about this, you'll see this very quickly. So watch for this. We have integrated Face ID and the Android equivalent. Boom, there we go. So that used Face ID through Identity Vault to let me back in the app, but only because I was signed in. This is my device as John Smith. So I love that. And additionally, there's more. So what if we are viewing the employee directory and we want to protect those numbers and things like that? What's great is if I put this in the background, we have automatic lock, hide screen on background. So that's all triggered just from a simple Boolean flag here where I say, yes, I definitely want to do that. I don't want to leak sensitive information. Great for banks, financial statements, or of course, employee data and expenses like this. So what's great is, you'll notice my alarm clock's going over there, and Ionifits as I toggle in and out on the iPhone, that locks that. So all of that accomplished and secured with just a couple configurations and Identity Vault and Auth Connect working together. So the last little bit of the demo, we've built a great app, runs really well on these features. And we've secured it with Auth Connect and Identity Vault. And now the last part is we need to, shipping the app is just the one step of many. What happens when we want to ship multiple features, new features quickly, and get them into the App Store? So that's where our Appflow service comes in. So I'm going to pop over here into our Appflow service. So this is mobile CI/CD for Capacitor and Cordova apps. And what I have here is, of course, here's our Ionifits app in the real screen. And the idea here, Max kind of hinted at it, a bunch of different features. So we have the ability to build your iOS and Android apps in the cloud, manage that all in one place so your team can, not stumble over each other, it's a great way to understand like what's the status of each environment from dev to QA, staging, and production. And what I'm going to show next is actually deploy them all the way from code commit into the app stores. So you can't see this here. I have my Mac going. I've updated, let's say, I got this expense feature in, I want to ship it. I'm going to actually push to production a new commit over here, and we're going to see this commit land in just a second over here. Let's go over to the commit screen. Awesome. So here is my commit less than a minute ago, because I literally just did this. And normally you'd be building and deploying in different environments. You'd send builds to your QA team, things like that. But when you're ready to move to production, often that's more of a manual situation where we'd merge into that production branch or main or whatever we reserve for that. So let's say I've gotten approval from my team to deploy to production. Here is that commit. Now, what this is going to do is actually pick up that commit and deploy it all the way to the Android and iOS app stores. And how I'm doing that is through some of our automation features. So I'm going to look at our Apple App Store specifically and kind of just set up how this works. So it's just a simple automation with a few details that you plug in, and then you're done. So here I'm saying deploy to the Apple App Store, watch that production branch, which is what I just committed to, right? Target iOS, use our latest build stack, which is basically all the software we use to build and deploy the app from various CLIs, to Node or other types of tools. We're using our production signing certificates, production environment variables, because again, for Auth 0 or whatever our SSO provider is, maybe we have different secrets, environment variables we need to plug in. And the best part, a simple toggle, and I'm saying deploy this to the Apple App Store. So that is all set. Let's see that in action. The build has already started. It takes a few minutes, so we're gonna come back to it later in the presentation. I have this wired up to deploy to Android and iOS, which is awesome. So you see that's deployment in progress. Let's click into that build. So this is taking my web-based app and building the native iOS version in this particular triggered deploy. So all of our details are here in terms of pulling the code from GitHub is where I happen to have it, Ionifits listed, and building and deploying the app. So we're not going to watch that. We're going to circle back. And my end goal here is to show you in App Store Connect over here that version 0010, we've got 09 here, is uploaded into App Store Connect, ready to deploy to test flight or production in our users. So stay tuned on that. We're gonna circle back on that. But all in all, we've got, as I showed, we have an app that runs on all these platforms. So here's Ionifits on all three. We've got iOS on the right, and this is, again, connected to my device. Here's an Android device in the middle. It's exact same app, looking great. And then the PWA, which is at ionifits.ionicframework.com. You can go play with that if you want to scan that QR code. We'll show that in a second. So all these from one code base, great looking app using the Ionic app platform. All right. So next up, Max is going to talk to us about some of our customers that are using Ionic. Take it away, Max.
Yeah, and I'm also furiously responding to questions in the chat. Just a reminder, if you want us to answer your question, make sure to put it in the Q&A tab, right, Matt?
Yes, that's right.
Then we'll see it.
We'll look at it.
Yeah, because otherwise we're probably going to miss it. So there's a Q&A tab where it'll just be questions we'll review at the end. And there's a few questions that I've already seen in there that I want to make sure we address first. So when we get to the end, we'll talk about those. All right. So Ionic, as Matt mentioned, is widely used today, powering upwards of 15% of all apps in the app stores. And on the enterprise side, something that you might not realize if you're just using our open source stack is we have a healthy and fast growing enterprise business. And we work with hundreds of companies that you use, and maybe use every single day. Brands like Aflac, BNY Mellon, GE Healthcare, Home Depot, H&R Block, the Social Security Administration. And the general theme with a lot of these companies is they like everyone, is realizing no matter what industry we're in, no matter what our product is, no matter what our business is, we need to get good at building our own software. It's becoming table stakes. And so they're turning to Ionic because we are just such an efficient, effective, uh, kind of balancing of all those constraints that I mentioned earlier, targeted at enterprises. So uh, this means we pretty much work in every single industry on Earth. If you want to go to the next slide here. And this is really because Ionic is a general purpose app development computing platform. You can build any kind of app for any problem space, any business. You can hire any web developer to come and work on it. It's very easy. You don't get stuck in just needing industry specific knowledge to come work on it. Really, anyone can work on these apps, and every single company can build apps on Ionic. That being said, we do have concentrations in certain industries. So banking, financial services, government, healthcare, insurance, technology, and services are definitely focus areas for us. So if you are in one of those industries, you can expect a deeper level of service. We are spending a lot of time making sure we really understand your unique needs in those industries so we can help you with the problems that you have. So I want to talk quickly about 3 flagship customers that kind of show the different types of things people are building and the scale of a typical Ionic app. So Amtrak is one of our flagship customers. They've built their consumer app for iOS and Android. And they are a great story because, like many companies, they used to have app development done by an outside third party and realized, this is just too important to the business to not be something that we have in-house, that we do really well ourselves, that we have that capability of being a top app development team inside of this company. So they decided to do that with Ionic, and it's working out really, really well. The other interesting thing is they are heavily using those live updates, those over-the-air updates with Appflow, and utilizing the rest of the Ionic platform. So really, really want to thank the Amtrak team. They've been huge, really help us develop our offering, and a great example of a high-scale consumer app built on Ionic. And then we move to AAA. Another example of a consumer flagship app built. This one's on Ionic 5. And they have a really interesting use case for those live updates from Appflow. And that's deploying kind of dynamic experience to their members based on geolocation. So that's something that you can do really interesting. It's kind of a capability, a superpower that you wouldn't have building native. But because they're building on web technology, because they're building on Ionic, they can do that. And this is really critical to the experience. So I'm thankful they were able to use our stack because it enabled them to do something kind of groundbreaking. And they're still using all those native features that you'd expect, like add to Apple Wallet, barcode scanning, things like that. So really, really great team over there. Mm-hmm. And then finally, we have Paylocity. They build cloud-based payroll and human capital management software. They've been an early customer for a long time. They're utilizing Identity Vault, which remember is our biometric authentication and secret storage functionality, and then Appflow for cloud builds and live updates. So really, really grateful to have them as well. So I think that's a little sampling of our customer base. We have hundreds of enterprise customers. Really in the last 2.5 years, we've built this enterprise business. We started just building a really popular open source platform, and then really the last 2.5 years, we've been focusing on enabling enterprises to build really serious mission critical stuff. And so Matt's going to jump into what you get, what's different about Ionic, and why you might want to do business with us.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Max. So, of course, we get a lot of questions, like as Max said, of what really sets Ionic apart. You've got other technologies that you might be looking at, like React Native, Flutter, or Xamarin, often get compared and asked about them. And let's get into that. So again, as Max had mentioned, we've got something that is just unheard of in kind of the open source and especially front end space. We have this wonderful customer success team that is comprised of teams of mobile experts. So not only do we have those mobile experts building the products themselves, on the mobile security and authentication front, but we've got the power to back them up from a customer service and training and other types of industry experience standpoint. So this is our wonderful team here on the right, who brings tons and tons of years and years of iOS and Android experience, deep connections into the industry. And of course, building with Ionic and being a web first company, also really, really strong backgrounds in web development across Angular, React, and Vue. So awesome team there. And part of, a bunch of different things that they do includes just our enterprise delivery and support packages. So you get a dedicated team that has this extensive delivery operations and support experience, really running the whole gamut for the enterprise. And we continually refine as we've worked through with a bunch of the customers, like the ones that Max highlighted for many years now. We've continued to refine and fine tune it for enterprise development and IT teams. So working across all those different types of industries, we are, been around for many years now, providing different developer and DevOps type of advisory and troubleshooting support, as well as we have a trusted partner ecosystem for offering staff augmentation, custom development needs, and things like that. So really, if you need it, we've got it in terms of our delivery and support offerings. And then kind of to wrap things up here, we also have our secure solutions that are fully managed by Ionic, keeping up to date with your iOS and Android operating system updates and new ways of and recommended ways, best practices from Apple and Google. That's, can be a full-time job and very easy, as we saw, to get wrong. And so, you can rely on Ionic to be there for you to build and maintain, especially maintain the secure native and web solutions like Auth Connect and Identity Vault that we saw. So at the end of the day, you can, by leveraging us and our solutions there, really what they do is it empowers you to free up your time to focus on the unique value and business logic that you have to build, that only you can build for your business and for your customers. And as we know, there's enough of that work to go around for all time, especially with the way software works. So we know you have your hands full. So rely on us and our team of experts to, help you build these cross-platform apps that work great and run really well everywhere. So awesome. Let's take a quick peep. We're going to stick around for Q&A. I love seeing the questions come in. Keep them coming. We're going to stick around for that. And but let's first check back in with Appflow. So again, I had deployed a build from my production branch, letting it know that that was something that we want to move and really deploy to users. And sure enough, just took a few minutes and we've got success according to Appflow. Let's go back onto the main build screen and see. So there we go. We've got a build success deployed to the App Store. So the real test is, did my code commit actually land in App Store Connect? So let's see if that happened. All right, look at that. So version 0010 has landed. And what I can do now is deploy that to my beta testers or actually go into the App Store settings. And if you're familiar with the UI here, we have to select the build for our first version or whatever version we're on. And I know it gets a little cached, so it doesn't always show up in this screen. But as we saw, that's okay. As we saw in test flight, it is here. So basically, awesome way to manage and skip so much of the hassle of dealing with security certificates, who manages that, how, and just set it up one time in Appflow and have that code commit all the way deployed to the App Store. So awesome stuff. Let's get on over to kind of wrap things up to our live Q&A. So again, leave the questions in the Q&A panel here. I'm going to start pulling this up, Max, and I think you have access to it too if you want to just start ping-ponging, get some of these questions answered. Before you do that, so again, I'm going to bring it back to the Ionifits app. If you didn't get a chance to scan the barcode here, give it a try. This is the real PWA version, and you can try it on your device right now. Open your camera and give it a shot, and we'll show the code and everything else in the follow-up email. So thank you.
Cool. So let's start with one that is not on the Q&A, but I was seeing in chat. With Appflow, do you need a Mac to build iOS apps in Appflow? The answer is no. Obviously, having a Mac will be the easiest approach. And so there's no reason to get rid of your Mac if you have one. But you can really, the reason people keep a Mac is for things like generating their certificate signing request. You can do all that with OpenSSL. So OpenSSL runs on everything, every kind of operating system. So if you don't have a Mac, you can handle those desktop specific tasks using OpenSSL. So we have documentation on that. If you go to Ionic.io, ionic.io/docs and go to the Appflow docs, we have documentation on setting up iOS builds, and it talks about using the OpenSSL process instead of using the Mac keychain and certificate manager. And then the other question was, what identity providers does Auth Connect handle? So the Auth product that we have, it works with any standard OpenID or OAuth provider, including custom ones that you've written yourself. That being said, it also works with Auth0, Ping Identity, Okta, Azure Active Directory, Azure B2C, AWS Cognito. So generally, those would be really easy to use. But if you have your own setup, it actually might be even easier for you because you probably have control over every configuration value. And sometimes that can be difficult where maybe you have another team that it set up a Auth0 instance or what have you, and they didn't configure it right. So, generally all that stuff is, as long as it supports those protocols, it'll work.
Nice. Here's a good question from Hendro. Wanted to ask about performance in Ionic apps. So, what is that? Is there any overhead with building with Ionic compared to pure native and things like that? So I think either of us can answer this, but I'll say, so at the end of the day, what Ionic's doing, being built with web technologies, is using what's called a web view, which is basically an embedded browser that is wrapped within your native app shell. So to your end users, it's just a native app that is deployed, as we saw, to Apple App Store and Google Play. And in terms of performance hits, I believe there might be some slight, really honestly negligible thing. Max can speak to that. But at the end of the day, when you look at modern device hardware getting faster and faster, and the modern web technologies improving all the time, you'll see, and that's why we've got the link up here. Go give it a shot yourself and see and try the performance on your device. But we are very confident in seeing that it is excellent and not something that you should be concerned with. Any thoughts on there, Max?
Yeah, the thing I would add is it is a native app. And so what you're doing is you're building a lot of the experience in that web view control, but you can easily drop down to native for anything else. So generally what we see teams that are really successful is they'll build 95% of that experience. And if they have one part of it that's like, really benefits from native code, let's say a augmented reality experience, that is so straightforward to drop down to native for just that one view. And then you're, only having to add, 5% of your app code is in native, and the rest can be in that web layer. And so really, embrace that hybrid approach. You're not, just because you built an Ionic doesn't mean you only have to build every screen, every part of the experience in that web view. You can really mix and match. And so if you take that approach, there really is no limit because it is literally a native app. So that's the way that we look at it.
Awesome. Cool. So the next question is about Vue and React support. So React, we've had Ionic React and React support for about a little over a year now. And Vue support landed just a few months ago, back in October. So someone's asking about documentation, more content on that. And I am happy to tell you that that is definitely in the plans for my team this year to work on more content for React and Vue. If there's any particular items that you want us to cover, because of course the gamut of those and potential topics is huge, feel free to send us a message on Twitter at Ionic Framework, or contact us through the website, or leave some comments here. We'll always see them, and we really love feedback and getting ideas. So definitely send those there. We do have full documentation for Vue and React in our Ionic docs. And again, if there's anything missing, please check those out. Let's see. Michael W. Hey, Michael asks, hey, does Auth Connect work with an in-house custom Auth setup? Sometimes, you're not able to use Azure, AWS, etc. And is that possible? So that one, I think we might need to check. Max, do you have an idea?
Yeah, no, I just answered that. As long as it works with OpenID or OAuth, then you're good to go.
Got it. I'm just a little distracted going through the questions.
No worries.
Awesome. Yes, let's see. This is great. We just added functionality for this. So how does Appflow, our continuous integration CI/CD service, play with monorepos that might house multiple Ionic apps? So this is something that we recently added support for. I will actually pull that up, but basically we do have some monorepo support. I will find and drop in the link here. I believe we're starting with, kind of a high level approach to that, because monorepo support means many different things to many different folks. So, keep that in mind. But again, if there's any other type of functionality with that, definitely let us know. But we have a great little guide here over in the Appflow docs. I'm going to send this, Max, if you want to take another one.
Yeah, so I see one about enterprise support and services. Does it include pair programming with us to set up best practices and skeletons in our code base? Well, so the answer is kind of. We do code reviews, we do architecture reviews. We don't sit down and pair program necessarily. We aren't writing app code for your app, but we absolutely can help review them. In some cases, we published 5+ page, actually a lot more page reports on best practices that we've seen in your app. So absolutely, we can help you and avoid making big mistakes. And that includes not, with Ionic as well, but also if we're able to help you with something like Angular or React, we can guide you with best practices there, because we have a team of experts who are really, really good at all those different technologies.
Yep. Another great question on if we support with Ionic Framework, do we have any plans to support desktop anytime soon? And features like that. So actually, we have to get some more details out on that soon. I think we're still underway with 2021 planning on that front. But Max, I believe we are planning on some desktop support this year, aren't we?
Yep. So we are exploring, we're not exploring, we're actively working on improving Ionic support for desktop. So keep an eye out for that. Ionic 6, I believe we will have some of those updates in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Another question. This time on, enterprise companies are very protective over their products. And they've been asked if anyone can grab the source code from an APK or IAPA file, which is the native binary that you get but when you build an iOS or Android app. Are there any plans to build any enterprise plugins that obfuscate code?
The answer is no, and the reason is because you shouldn't worry about that. And what I mean by that is any native app can be decompiled enough to see what's going on. So you should not worry about your code being reverse engineered, because there should be nothing that someone would gain by reverse engineering your code. And even if you obfuscate it, someone who is really motivated, who is really smart, will be able to do that regardless of whether it's written in JavaScript, written in Java, written in Swift. They will be able to figure out what you're doing. And then in particular, you absolutely never want to store sensitive keys or tokens or encryption keys in your actual source code. That is never a good idea, no matter what you're using, no matter how much obfuscation you're doing. Instead, there are ways to do that safely. Identity Vault, which we mentioned, can help you do that because it'll store those values in secure hardware on the device in a way that can only be accessed through biometric APIs and things like that. So that's the only time you should ever have any kind of sensitive values on the device. But generally, obfuscation is pointless. Minification will at least keep a quick prying eye away from anything, but you're not really gaining anything through that.
Great question, though. Someone asks with Linda, thank you for Auth Connect and Identity Vault. Is it possible to allow the user to start an app and use it in offline mode if they've logged in the last time they used the app? And the answer is yes. So all of that is when you deploy those solutions, they're integrated natively into the application. It's not something that's connected to the internet, really. It's all built into the app as a part of the native code. So offline scenarios are at play there. In fact, the same way that Face ID, as I signed in with that worked, I didn't need an internet connection. That was all built into the app. So good question. Max, is there any native functionality that Ionic does not have access to?
The answer is no, because you literally are building a native app. So you have access to every single piece of functionality. Every native API is available to you. So the question is there a plugin for it? And the answer to that might be no. However, one of the things that we've done with Capacitor, which is the native runtime that we just released the beta for V3, we've been spending a lot of time working on that. It replaces Cordova. Building native plugins in Capacitor is way easier than it's been in the past with Cordova. So generally, if you can't find a plugin off the shelf, you can build your own. But again, you have full access to that native functionality under the hood.
Awesome. Yes. Here's a good question about the certificates and configuration files and how those work with Appflow. So briefly, I'll show that. So you saw that I pushed a commit and then it auto magically deployed it to the App Store. So one step I didn't show is there is a one-time setup step to configure your development and production certificates. So we have that under signing certificates. So here's my production ones. I can safely show them to you because everything is secure and blocked off. But basically, you grab the P12 file, a provisioning file profile, which is the standard way that you deploy with a pure native app and get them into the store. You set those up one time. And then as you saw with my commits and deploy to App Store functionality, here's Android, you're good to go. So that's what I love. If you've built, regardless of what type of product you've used, the security around signing certificates can be confusing. We've got docs and guides for that and lots of help out there. But what's great about it is it's a one-time setup. I think with Apple, you do have to reconfigure them once per year, which is Apple's expiration rules. But beyond that, I'm just happily shipping features every day. Here's my commit list and getting those in and don't have to touch them. So I figured them out once, and that's part of my favorite thing with working with Appflow is just, the headaches of understanding security certificates really goes away. And then when it comes to, Max has mentioned the hot code push, that's a whole nother demo that we have you can check that out on our website. Are there any cases where code changes might not be possible? Max, you want to take that one? The live update feature.
Yeah. So generally you can push live updates as long as it's web assets. So any UI changes, any business logic functionality that's in that web layer, you can update. What you can update are things that are essentially native functionality or binary changes. So let's say you add a new native plugin. Let's say you add some custom native code to your project. You will have to actually do a traditional submission again, because that is signed native code that can't be updated remotely. But the web asset layer in between, it's really no different than loading a web page. So you're able to deploy that anytime you want remotely. And we have features to help you figure out, when a binary update is necessary, when it's not, and help you navigate all that.
Nice. I think we have time for a couple more questions.
There's one about staff augmentation. So we don't offer staff augmentation. However, we do have a really healthy partner ecosystem of other dev shops, consulting organizations that do offer staff augmentation. And in general, they will be very skilled at Ionic because they focus on Ionic. So definitely we can help set you up with a partner. Otherwise, you can view the partners page as Matt is showing here.
Yep. Yep. Lots of support, all fully vetted by us. Great companies. Can we customize Ionic provided CSS? How easy is it to override and make changes? So that is absolutely possible. That's we use the latest and greatest there with CSS. So anything that I showed off today in terms of our components, like our login page, can be customized with SCSS variables. In fact, I'm doing some of that here with the Ionic cards and setting backgrounds and things. So that is absolutely possible. We also have a really great theme builder in our documentation that lets you, at a global level, set a bunch of different, it's the theme variables. You can set your primary, secondary colors and success and alerts, all these different states at a high level. And these variables, CSS variables, get used across the app. So yeah, lots of customization and theming there. We see all types of great apps built. If you take a look back at the customer list, you'll see that all those apps are very different, but all using Ionic framework and what that provides under the hood. Max, you recently got a MacBook with an M1 Silicon chip. A lot of folks are asking about how that works with Ionic. How's the performance and does everything work? Mainly.
Yeah. So I've now had a month or two to kind of figure out all the rough edges. Generally, iOS development works amazingly well. Generally, working on the website works great. I think if you use VS Code, I think the VS Code Insiders update has native support for Apple Silicon. I don't know about if that went live yet for everyone, but that works out really well. Rosetta, not really my thing. You definitely notice this performance hit. So I don't like using the Rosetta version, but the one thing I've had issues with is Android Studio. So Android Studio works fine, but emulators, there's only a preview build for the emulator. However, I suspect that they're going to fully support it. And then not only that, but I would expect that once they do fully support it, it's going to be a lot faster than the x86 images. I don't know. I'm not informed enough to really definitively say that, but that's my hope, given that the architecture will be easier to emulate.
Mm-hmm. Nice. All right. Maybe like one or two more questions. That's all we have time for. Thanks, everyone. When we send out an email, please reply to that if you have anything we missed today with the recording of the presentation, and we'll be sure to get you an answer. Let's see. Do we have any ROI calculators for differentiators like Ionic versus React Native and Xamarin and things like that? That is something we should look into, Max. I don't believe we have any definitive, monetary type resources like I believe this person's asking for. We do have a bunch of, really great articles and information in our resource center. All type running the gamut of articles and case studies that you can check out with all highlighting tons of different highly performant apps and also comparisons to, kind of like the native apps, Ionic versus React Native, Flutter, etc. So I would start there and go from there. And anything else, Max, you wanted to add? I think we can wrap it up.
I'm going through the list, responding to seeing if we missed any big ones. There's a few people saying we never responded to their question. Very sorry. We've got a lot of questions, so we're doing our best.
Josh P had asked a great question about the government. Do our security solutions cover requirements like FedRAMP or SOC 2 compliance? I believe they do, Max. Do you have any details on that?
Yeah, so I need to go and check, but I think the way to think about it is that this would be one necessary component of your own correct implementation of those standards. So, for example, if you store data encrypted at rest, that's a key part of being able to fulfill those. The other product we didn't mention on this call is we have a secure SQLite solution that supports encrypted data stores, SQLite data stores. and that would work with Identity Vault to manage the encryption key. So those two in tandem could be a main part of fulfilling those obligations.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And I think we'll land on end with this last question. Is it a good idea to migrate an existing app from Cordova to Appflow? Cordova to Capacitor? And I would say absolutely. Capacitor 3, the third version, is in beta. We just launched that last week, and we're going to follow up with the full release shortly. We've got, as Max showed, many hobbyists to large enterprises running on Capacitor successfully today. And if you check out our documentation, we've got a complete migration strategy guide here, covering everything you need to do to migrate. And always remember that 99% of Cordova plugins are backward compatible with Capacitor. So when you get started, it's, there's really hardly any functionality, if at all, that you wouldn't be able to carry over from a simple migration. So check that out. I've also delivered multiple presentations on how to migrate and other webinars like that, which again is under our resource center under webinars. So lots of videos and things like that if you really want to dig in that way. But our documentation is definitely the best way to start.
Hey, Matt, I want to answer one more because Webtronic Labs is very sad that we didn't answer any of their questions. And I'm looking back. They had a question about the performance hit of using Ionic UI components in a capacitor app versus, I presume, just rolling your own and not using Ionic. The way to think about it is not that there's a performance hit by using Ionic UI components in capacitor, but that Ionic UI components implement in the highest performance way platform standards that your app is likely going to need if you want it to feel like a traditional native mobile app and perform like one too. So you certainly do not need to use Ionic UI components, but just keep in mind that you'll have to think about, transitions, animations, routing. Maybe I have a simple app that's kind of more of like a one-page experience or something like that. Then generally, code adds overhead, right? So if you don't need to build an app that feels like a native app, then you can really drop down and do whatever you want. But I wouldn't think about it so much as Ionic adds overhead, but rather it gives you those performance benefits out of the box that you're probably going to need.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This was Ionic for Enterprise with Max Lynch and myself, Matt Netkow. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll send out a link to the recorded presentation and all the Q&A shortly later today. Thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, take care.
Thank you.